What happens when an actor known for unpredictable moods sits across from a talk show panel that never backs down? You're about to see a conversation that started calm, took a sharp turn, and then spun so far out of control that the crew didn't know whether to intervene or let the cameras roll. Stick with this story. You won't believe how fast things escalated. The audience applauded politely as Billy Bob Thornton strolled onto the set of The View, wearing sunglasses dark enough to block out a solar eclipse. He gave a small nod, settled into his chair, folded his hands like he was bracing himself for whatever was coming. Whoopi Goldberg started the interview with soft, harmless questions about his latest film. Billy Bob answered with short, steady replies. For a moment, it looked like this would be one of those relaxed morning chats, friendly, predictable, and maybe even a little dull. But that didn't last long. Joy Behar leaned forward with that grin she uses right before she throws the first punch in a conversation. She didn't ease into it either. She went straight for the personal. She brought up his marriages, all 6 of them, with the kind of blunt delivery that usually gets the studio audience laughing. But this time, no laughter came. The room froze. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Billy Bob took off his sunglasses slowly, placed them on the table, and stared at her with a look that wasn't angry yet. It definitely wasn't amused. His voice dropped into a deeper, calmer tone, the kind people use right before things get uncomfortable. He pushed back on the question, not by raising his voice, but by pointing out the timing. First 30 seconds. And that's where we're going, he said, almost whispering. The moment he said it, you could feel the shift in the room. Joy didn't blink. She reminded him that his marriages were public record. She argued that asking about them wasn't personal, it was fair game. That's when the sparks started. Billy Bob's jaw tightened. His replies grew sharper. He made it clear that he wasn't there to talk about his entire romantic history. He was there to talk about his work, and nothing else. Sonny Hostin tried to calm the air, but the damage was already done. Billy Bob felt cornered. Joy felt challenged. And the tension spread across the table like a storm cloud. This wasn't an interview anymore. This was 2 people locked in a battle neither of them planned, but neither was willing to walk away from, and this was just the beginning. After Joy doubled down and insisted her question was fair, the air shifted. Nobody on that stage was breathing normally anymore. You could see Alyssa glance between the 2 of them. Sunny reposition her notes, and Sarah press her lips together, like she wished she were anywhere else. Billy Bob leaned back in his chair. But it wasn't a relaxed lean. It was the kind of lean someone makes right. Before they decide whether they're staying or walking out, his voice stayed calm, but the edge in it was sharp enough to cut glass. He reminded Joy that being an actor didn't mean surrendering his privacy. He said he'd spent his life talking about his craft, his films, his music, his writing. But somewhere along the way, everybody decided his personal life was public property. Joy didn't flinch. She fired back that public figures get scrutiny. She repeated her argument that nothing she mentioned was hidden or secret. That's when Billy Bob's tone changed. It's not louder, colder. He accused her of hiding behind the idea of public record to justify anything she wanted to ask. He said people use that excuse all the time to dig into parts of a person's life. They have no right to. That comment struck a nerve. Joy crossed her arms and called him sensitive. In that moment, the whole audience reacted, a mix of gasps and nervous laughs because everyone knows what calling someone sensitive does. It pokes the bruise, dares the other person to explode. Billy Bob didn't explode, but he did something worse for live television. He called out the tactic. Itself, he said. Calling someone sensitive for setting a boundary isn't conversation, it's manipulation. He said it in a steady, quiet tone, which somehow made the accusation hit harder. You could feel the studio tighten like a coiled spring. Whoopi tried to step in. She tried to steer things back to the movie, but it was too late. Billy Bob saw the direction Joy was pushing the conversation. He refused to play along. He said he came there to talk about his film, not get grilled about his private life like he was on trial. Joy rolled her eyes and told him he was being dramatic. When she said that, everything inside him snapped, not loudly, but with the kind of finality you only see when someone reaches their absolute limit. He stood up, The audience gasped in unison. The hosts froze. Even the camera operator seemed unsure whether to follow him or keep the wide shot. Billy Bob stared down at Joy, said she kept poking and prodding him until she got the reaction she wanted. Then he added, "Well, congratulations, Joy." Told him to sit down. He refused. The crack in their conversation had now opened into a full split, and they were only halfway through the segment. Billy Bob didn't just stand. He rose in a way that made the whole set feel smaller. His chair scraped back, echoing across the studio. That sound alone sent a wave of shock through the room. People in the audience leaned forward, unsure whether to watch or look away. He wasn't raising his voice, wasn't gesturing wildly. He was doing something far more dangerous on live television. He was speaking with absolute clarity. Joy told him he was overreacting. She called the whole moment ridiculous. She waved a hand like she was brushing off a minor inconvenience instead of a brewing storm. But Billy Bob didn't blink. He stared at her with a steady, almost eerie calm. He pressed her on why she thought his frustration was dramatic. He asked why a guest asking for basic respect was treated like a meltdown. Joy pushed back, insisting the show treated everyone the same and he wasn't special. She said tough questions were part of the job, and if he couldn't handle them, that was his issue. The audience reacted again, not loudly, but with a rumble of discomfort. They knew they were watching something spill out of control, yet nobody could predict where it was going next. Whoopi stepped in, trying to restore order. You could see her shift her chair, plant her feet, and lift her hands like a referee. She suggested they take a breath and move forward, but neither Billy Bob nor Joy was hearing her anymore. They were locked in, eyes fixed on each other, each determined not to back down. Then Joy went for a line that changed the entire tone of the altercation. She accused him of not being able to handle a strong woman asking hard questions. The moment those words left her mouth, you could practically feel every molecule in the room freeze. Billy Bob inhaled slowly. His jaw tightened. His voice dropped to a low, sharp register that carried more force than shouting ever could, he warned her not to twist the situation into something it wasn't. He said the issue wasn't her being a woman. It was her refusal to respect boundaries. He insisted he'd worked with countless tough, talented women in the industry and admired many of them. This, he said, wasn't about gender. It was about respect. That line landed hard. Joy didn't step back. She stepped forward. She stood up and matched his height, creating a visual that said everything the audience needed to know. This wasn't a disagreement anymore. It was a standoff. She accused him of coming to the show with an attitude. He countered that he came to promote a film, not have his personal life dissected. Whoopi's voice cut through the tension again, louder this time.
Ow.
She tried to steer them toward a commercial break. But before she could pull things back under control, Joy and Billy Bob fired one more round of verbal shots, and then Joy delivered a line that practically scorched the air. "You're on my stage." Billy Bob laughed, not with humor, but disbelief. He told her it wasn't her stage. It was a studio, a workplace, a shared space, and he was done being disrespected in it. Whoopi finally signaled for a break. The red lights faded, but the damage, that was only beginning. When the show cut to commercial, the studio didn't relax. It tightened. The cameras powered down, but the tension stayed exactly where it was, hanging over the hosts like a weight they couldn't shrug off. Whoopi leaned in toward a producer. Whispering furiously, Sunny stared down at her hands. Sarah kept glancing at the door Billy Bob had walked through, as if expecting him to storm back in. Alyssa sat frozen, trying to look neutral, but failing miserably. And Joy? She kept her arms crossed, shoulders stiff, muttering under her breath about how she had done nothing wrong. Her voice wasn't loud, but every word was sharp enough to cut the silence in the room. 3 minutes. That's all the break was, but it felt like 30. Then came the sound. Footsteps. Heavy ones, purposeful ones. The crew turned first. Then the audience. Then the hosts. Billy Bob Thornton stepped back onto the stage. Nobody clapped. Nobody even breathed. It was the kind of moment where the entire room knows something is about to happen, but no one can predict what it'll be. He didn't sit. He didn't smile. He didn't apologize. He stood at the edge of the stage and looked straight at Joy like he had returned with unfinished business. "I didn't come back for you," he said, voice steady and controlled. "I came back so nobody watching thinks. I walked away because I was scared." Joy raised an eyebrow. "So now you want to talk?" she said with a smirk that only added gasoline to the fire. Billy Bob wasn't having it. He told her she had been poking at him since down, trying to get a reaction for the sake of a headline, and that she finally got one. But he made it clear he wasn't going to let the story become Billy Bob's storms off. He wanted people to know why. Whoopi tried to pull him toward the table. "Sit down, let's talk this out," she pleaded. But he didn't even look her way. His eyes stayed locked on Joy. He accused her of hiding behind the structure of the show, the table, panel, the cameras, and saying things she'd never dare say to someone in a private conversation. He challenged her directly. "Would you open with questions about my marriages if we were talking at a dinner party?" Joy hesitated. "Not long, but long enough." Billy Bob caught it instantly. "A pause," he said, "tells me everything." Sonny tried to intervene. Lissa tried to soften the moment. Both failed. Joy fired back that she would absolutely ask those questions anywhere. She insisted it wasn't personal, it was her job. Billy Bob countered that the show wasn't asking hard questions. It was digging for gossip. It was turning someone's personal history into entertainment. It was disrespect disguised as journalism. The audience watched like they were witnessing a courtroom showdown. It's not a daytime talk show. And the only thing more surprising than Billy Bob returning was how far he was willing to take this confrontation. By the time Billy Bob finished calling out the show's approach, the atmosphere on set had changed from tense to electric. Nobody was leaning back in their chairs anymore. Every host was upright, bracing. The crew stood frozen, just off camera. Unsure whether to intervene or let the moment unfold, it was becoming clear this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a collision. Sonny tried to calm things down by explaining the show's role, asking difficult questions, pushing conversations forward. But Billy Bob wasn't buying it. He turned to her, steady and controlled, and asked why the hard questions never involved his work, his craft, or anything he'd actually come to promote. Instead, he said they only dug into the parts of his life that could generate buzz. Joy fired right back, reminding him that he had spoken publicly about his past before. She said he wrote about those relationships in his memoir, mentioned them in interviews, and lived a public life. Billy Bob didn't deny it, but he drew a line no one on that panel expected. He said telling his own story on his own terms was not an invitation for talk show hosts to weaponize that story later. He insisted personal experiences weren't props, and that using them to corner someone in front of a live audience was not journalism. Joy laughed, but it wasn't the light. Joking joy the audience was used to. It was sharper, defensive. She accused him of exaggerating and playing the victim. She told him he was reading too much into a simple question. And that was the moment the mood shifted again, this time darker. Billy Bob leaned forward. His voice didn't rise, but it gained weight. He laid out every moment from the start of the interview. How he tried to redirect, how Joy dismissed him, how she labeled him sensitive, how she mocked him when he stood up, and how she painted him as dramatic when he tried to walk away. He laid it out like a timeline calm, detailed, undeniable. Joy didn't back down. She insisted she was doing her job. She reminded him that The View asks every guest personal questions, and he wasn't being singled out. But Billy Bob wasn't arguing about the show's format anymore. He was arguing about sincerity. He pointed out the moments Joy could have eased the tension, but didn't. He pointed out how she pushed every emotional button, sometimes twice. He accused her of stirring the pot deliberately, not for the audience's benefit, but for the spectacle. The audience sat in total silence. Nobody wheezed. Nobody whispered. Even breathing felt too loud. What happened next shocked even the co-hosts. Joy stood. Again, she accused him of being unable to separate his ego from the conversation. She claimed he couldn't handle scrutiny. She mocked the idea that he was treated unfairly. Billy Bob laughed a dry, exhausted laugh and told her that twisting someone's frustration into ego was exactly the kind of behavior he was talking about. He said, "Strong people set boundaries. And the only people who get upset about boundaries are the ones who benefit from breaking them." That line hit Joy harder than anything said so far. The moment Billy Bob said that line about boundaries, the room shifted again. Not subtly, not slowly. It was instant, like the air snapped. Joy's face changed first. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes narrowed. She wasn't just irritated anymore. She was offended. She stood up so fast, her chair scraped across the floor, drawing another gasp from the audience. It wasn't just the hosts reacting now. Even the crew members near, the cameras flinched. "I'm done with this," Joy said, voice strained with anger. "I'm done being lectured by someone who came on this stage, walked off, came back for attention, and now wants to act like he's a victim." Her tone wasn't playful. It wasn't sarcastic. This time, she meant every word. And that was the moment every person on set realized this wasn't an interview gone wrong. This was a fight, a real one, and nobody knew how to stop it. 2 security staff stepped out from the wings. They didn't grab anyone or speak up, but their presence spoke volumes. The show had crossed a line the network never wanted crossed, but Billy Bob didn't react to them. He reacted to Joy. He didn't shout. He didn't posture. He simply said something that cut deeper than anything else so far. "The interview was over the moment you made it personal. Everything after that was just you proving my point." The room fell silent. For a beat, nobody moved. Then Joy demanded. The producers remove him from the stage, but Billy Bob wasn't finished. He told the security team he would leave, but on his own terms. He said he wasn't being forced out by Joy. He was choosing to step away because continuing the conversation was pointless. Then he walked toward the exit, but stopped halfway. He turned around slowly, as if he realized there was still something he needed to say, not to Joy, but to everyone watching. "One more thing," he began. His voice softened, but the weight of it doubled. He spoke directly. To the audience, not the studio audience, but the millions who would see the clip online. He addressed anyone who had ever been called sensitive for protecting themselves. Anyone who had ever been mocked for refusing to overshare. Anyone who had ever walked away from a bad conversation only to be blamed for it. "You're not crazy," he said. "You're not overreacting. You don't owe anyone your personal pain just because they think they're entitled to it." Stunned hush swept through the room.
Oh.
Even Whoopi stopped trying to intervene. For the first time, she let him finish. Joy rolled her eyes so hard the audience reacted. "Oh God, now he's giving a speech," she muttered, but the tone of the moment had already shifted. It wasn't a fight anymore, it was a message. Billy Bob lowered his hand and said he was done. Truly done, and then he left. No shouting. No dramatic exit music. Just the sound of his footsteps fading as security followed at a respectful distance. Joy stood trembling, gripping the edge of the table to steady herself. The other hosts watched silently, unsure how to recover from what had just unfolded. But the real shock was still coming. When Billy Bob finally stepped off the stage for the second and final time, the silence he left behind felt heavier than anything he had said. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes after an argument. It was the kind that sinks in when everyone in the room realizes something important has just happened, and nobody knows how to follow it. The audience didn't clap. They didn't boo. They didn't do anything. They sat completely still as the security staff drifted back into the shadows, and the red recording lights dimmed. For a moment, it felt like the studio itself was holding its breath. Joy stood frozen at the table, shoulders tense, hands gripping the edge of the desk as though it might keep her upright. When she finally spoke, her voice shook just a little as she said, "Well, I guess some people can't handle real talk," but the comment didn't land. Not this time. No one laughed. No one nodded. Not even the audience members who normally backed her without hesitation. It was clear the room wasn't with her. Not after everything that had just unfolded. Whoopi rubbed her forehead. She looked exhausted, drained like someone who had spent the past 10 minutes trying to stop a crash she could see coming from miles away. She told the audience they'd be right back, but even that line, the most routine part of the show, came out shaky. As the stage lights dimmed for the next commercial, the tension thickened again, not loud, but suffocating. Joy sat down slowly. She looked like she was replaying the entire argument in her head, frame by frame, and not liking what she saw. The other hosts didn't touch her, didn't console her, didn't even make eye contact. They sat in their chairs, staring at different parts of the room, processing. Alyssa looked rattled, not angry, not upset, just stunned. Sunny seemed conflicted, as though she understood both sides and didn't want to take either. Sarah looked down at her cue cards like she hoped they'd tell her what to do next. Whoopi rested her elbows on the table, head in her hands, whispering something no one else could hear. What stood out most was Joy's expression. Not fury, not triumph, not even defiance. It was uncertainty flickering across her face for the first time, a tiny crack in the armor. Maybe she realized Billy Bob wasn't just arguing. He was holding up a mirror. When the cameras turned back on again, the show had to keep going. That's the rule in television, but the energy never recovered. The chair where Billy Bob had been sitting stayed empty. And every time the camera swept past it, the emptiness reminded everyone of what had just unfolded. Joy didn't apologize. She didn't reflect. She didn't soften. But she wasn't the same either. Something had shifted. The audience sensed it. The hosts sensed it. And somewhere backstage, the producers definitely sensed it. That moment, that raw, filtered, uncomfortable moment was about to follow the show far beyond that studio. But the real question wasn't who caused it, or who was to blame, or who won. The real question was whether anyone walked away from that table unchanged. Even after the show returned from its final break, the tension still clung to the studio like fog that refused to lift. The hosts sat in place, but none of them had the same posture they did when the episode began. The energy had been stripped. From the room, placed with something quiet and heavy, Billy Bob's empty chair sat in the frame like its own story, a reminder of everything that had unfolded in the last segment. The producers didn't remove it. They didn't try to hide it. Maybe they understood that pretending nothing happened would only make it worse. Whoopi took a deep breath and faced the camera. She apologized to viewers, not for anyone's behavior, not for any specific moment, but for what everyone just witnessed. And even that line sounded careful, measured, balanced on a very thin wire. Joy didn't look at her. Joy didn't look at anyone. She stared straight ahead, her shoulders rigid. Her expression caught somewhere between anger and confusion. She didn't speak, and for the first time that day, silence was the loudest thing about her. The rest of the panel followed. The script. They moved on to the next segment. They read their notes. They discussed the next topic. But nothing landed. Every sentence felt like they were reading underwater. Every laugh sounded unsure, forced, fragile. The audience sensed it too. The usual energy, the clapping, the chatter, the reactions never returned. When the broadcast finally ended, the red lights dimmed for the last time that morning. The studio exhaled all at once, as though it had been holding a single breath through the entire last hour. Backstage, producers moved quickly, speaking in hushed voices. Phone calls were already being made. Segments were already being reviewed. Clips were being flagged. Everyone knew this episode wouldn't just disappear into the archives. It would circulate. It would trend. It would be dissected. Enjoy. She walked off the set without a word. Her co-hosts watched her go. None of them followed. Meanwhile, somewhere outside the studio, Billy Bob was leaving the building, sunglasses back on, shoulders squared, moving with the determination of someone who knew exactly where he stood, even if the world around him was about to explode with opinions. Because that was the truth, no matter what either of them intended, no matter who was right or wrong. People were going to pick sides. Some would say Billy Bob defended his boundaries. Some would say Joy was just doing her job. Some would blame the question. Some would blame the reaction. And many, maybe most, would say both of them got swept up in something neither expected to spiral so far. But the real story wasn't about a fight on a talk show. It wasn't about Joy's pushback or Billy Bob's frustration. The real story was about a much bigger question. One that every viewer was silently asking themselves by the end. Where's the line? Where's the line between curiosity and intrusion? Between a question and a provocation? Between a conversation and a confrontation? Nobody on that stage had the answer. Not Billy Bob, not Joy, not the audience, not even the camera crew still. Packing up their gear, all anyone knew was this. That moment, that clash, would be remembered long after the episode ended. Not because someone won, not because someone lost, because sometimes the most unforgettable moments on live television are the ones that never should have happened at all.